What's the most shocking thing you have witnessed? The guy I had dated most recently, I considered him my soulmate. After dating a few months, we moved in together. Lieutenant was the most magical and happiest time of my life. We were just so in sync with each other. We completed each other's sentences, barely quarreled, and just felt like the luckiest couple of Earth. Our sex life was like that of the movies. We couldn't get enough of each other. And just like that, one day out of the blue he came home and told me to leave the house. Basically he was kicking me out of the house. His reason was work stress and he needed time alone. None of it made sense to me. I begged him saying I don't have any place to go and was too embarrassed to crash at my friends' homes. But he turned into this cruel monster and said he wanted me out of his home. He needed to be alone. I camped for 2 days outside his house in my car, crying my eyes out, not understanding WTF had happened. After 2 months of no contact, he called me and apologized for his behavior, saying he was overwhelmed with work stress. Fucking bastard. The morning of September the 11th, 2001, I heard on the car radio that there was an airplane crash at the World Trade Center. I was baffled. But I got into the car with my daughter, who was 2 days shy of 1, at about 9:15 a.m. and we drove toward her new playgroup in the Brooklyn neighborhood of Fort Greene from our neighborhood of Midwood. At the junction of Atlantic Avenue, Major Artery, and Vanderbilt Avenue, I stopped for a red light and saw huge flames and billowing smoke coming from the World Trade Center over in Manhattan. I was totally flabbergasted. People were walking in the street, cradling their heads in their hands. I just stared and couldn't believe what I saw. We did go to the playgroup, but everyone who arrived decided to leave early because of the horrors our city was facing. Second most shocking thing I experienced, the day after Hurricane Sandy in late October 2012. Work, school was cancelled that day, so I left my family for a while to drive and see the conditions in Lower Brooklyn. As I drove along Ocean Parkway, another major artery, I noticed destruction starting at Avenue V and going south of that. Massive trees were uprooted, cars were ruined or half-parked on mailboxes and other horrors. When I got to Coney Island, I drove slowly along Surf Avenue near the amusement park rides and Nathan's famous hot dogs. Somewhere in the West Teens or 20s streets I saw a rush of water approaching, flooding from the beach toward the street, and I drove away quickly. 2 awful events in Nick history. I witnessed 2 suicides when I lived in Kyiv, Ukraine. First one, my apartment was across the river, away from the city center, in Ruzanavka, near Metro Livoberezhna. There were dozens of tall apartment buildings nearby. I lived in one, and every half dozen or so naturally formed a little community that encircled a small outdoor common area. One day, a friend and I were walking to the metro. As we passed through one of the common areas, we hear an unintelligible shout, look over in the direction it came from, and are just in time to see this guy pass the last couple of floors and hit the ground. It was horrific. A crowd gathered around the body, but we just kept walking, not sure what to do. Second one was standing on the platform in the Kreshkatik metro station. You can tell the train is coming quite a few moments before you even see the headlights, because there's a huge gust of wind. When the wind came, everyone waiting shuffled forward a few inches in anticipation. Out of nowhere, literally just a second before the train pulled even with the platform and with everyone looking in its direction, a woman jumped in front of it. She was instantly obliterated. Like just destroyed. There couldn't even have been enough left of her to bury. The trains have to shut down for a while when that happens, obviously, so I just went back up to the street and sat in a cafe for a while. I felt sick for days. I was later told that the suicide rate in Ukraine spikes like crazy in the winter. There's no snow ice removal outside the city center, or there wasn't in 2009, 2010, or 2011, and it creates an incredibly gloomy atmosphere. Add to that the relentless, biting, almost hateful cold, the absence of reliable central or any other kind of heating, and the reality that you do eventually start questioning whether winter will ever end, and it's not hard to believe, especially if you're already prone to depression. Today I'm Canadian, but I was born in Bolivia, and when I was around 7 years old I still lived there with my parents. I'm what you could then be called from aristocratic stock, being my parents well educated from the then called upper ruling class. We had just moved to another city, and back in those years moving from city to city was quite a difficult process. Connecting roads were dirt roads. Finally we were living at our new destination, but our furniture and packed belongings kept arriving. The unloading was done by local low-class peasants who earned their living in the cities as porters of all kinds of things. One of them, while carrying a heavy package, bumped it accidentally into a wall. My father, a man then in his early 30s, impeccably dressed in suit and tie, proceeded to yell all kinds of profanities at the porter and started kicking him several times, as if you would kick a dog. I have never kicked a dog, but I have seen do it. I, with my 7 years of age, was absolutely shocked to this day, and can recall every single detail of that incident. In my child's mind, I could not understand such a brutal, unjust, unfair, cowardly action towards a defenseless man, much less understand it coming from my father. From that day on, forever on, I never again trusted my father, and the respect I had for him was never to be recovered until the day he died, even though I never saw him perform a similar action again. He forever shamed my soul with his brutal action. Once I was late to my tuition. A friend of mine whom I used to go with was already there. I did not go inside as I wanted to see whether the teacher was in angry mood or not, but what I witnessed there completely shocked me. I couldn't understand why my friend having his finger in her mouth and why he was moving it. She was smiling then to see his finger completely wet. I was still trying to figure out what was going on there. He wiped out his finger and started teaching again. After an hour when the class ended, she did not come with me and asked me to tell her parents that she is taking some extra classes so she would be late. I found it very weird, and I don't know what clicked to my curious mind. I decided to have a look again from that hole after half an hour. I went there again, and what I saw, she was giving him blowjob. She was smiling while moving his mouth, and he was moaning looking at the ceiling fan. I was shocked and stunned. Then he suddenly pulled out his dick out of her mouth and ejaculated in the corner of the room. After that incident, I could not concentrate on my studies and left the tuition. She is still my friend though. It is the devastating earthquake that hit Kobe, Japan in 1995. It was early in the morning in the middle of winter. I was sleeping on the bed when I got a call from my sister, who told me to watch TV right away as the big earthquake happened in Kobe. My parents and younger sister lived there, so I turned on TV and I knew my hometown was severely hit by the earthquake, which we had never experienced before. I immediately called my parents and sister, but couldn't get through to them. The more news I heard, the more I came to realize how badly Kobe was damaged. Fire broke out in the area where my high school was, and so many houses and buildings were collapsed. So was my house where I had lived for 22 years. Around noon, I found my parents and sister alive, but as they lost their houses, they had to evacuate to a nearby school. 2 days later, I drove back to Kobe to see my parents, but the traffic was jammed that it took a half day to reach Kobe. They were at the corner of the gym, and what shocked me was so many people were crammed in such a small space and a flu was prevailing there. I took my sister and her 2-month-old baby to my house. What was the most unfortunate was the fact that our house was lost. It was a very shocking experience to me as well as my family. I cannot forget that experience, and every time I visit my hometown, that day comes to my mind. It was the summer of 1994 on a beautiful Sunday morning. I left my house to run a quick errand. About 1 block from my house, I turned onto a main street with 3 lanes in each direction. I initially did not see any other cars. I was driving west in the far right lane when less than a minute later a car going east on the opposite side of the road suddenly flips up into the air, does a somersault, and a person was ejected out of the front windshield and also went flying through the air, then landed on the road. It seemed to be going in slow motion. I immediately stopped my car. The other car landed upside down, and 2 people, that looked like teenage girls, came crawling out through the windshield. By this time other cars had arrived and were getting out to help the victims, and there were cars behind me honking their horns at me, so I drove away, still in shock. After the accident I tried to find out if everyone had survived, but due to HIPAA laws all I could be told was the coroner was not called, so that just says no one died at the scene. It still haunts me all these years later. When I was really young, I accidentally touched a spark plug wire while the car was running. That was the most literally shocking thing I've ever experienced. But I think you mean shocking in the lexical sense of causing indignation or disgust, or something so offensive as to be disgusting. I'm very well read, and have experienced a lot of things in my life that others might be disgusted or offended by, but which I personally would not feel the same way about. For example, going camping and having to sleep in the back seat of a car due to lack of sleeping bags, with my uncle in the front seat, and waking up to him sucking my penis. Certainly I was indignant about it, because I had not consented to that, but not shocked, as I already knew he was homosexual. And of course seeing the first news report of the jet crashing into the World Trade Center on 9/11 was emotionally jarring, but that's not something I personally experienced. And there was a time I was 11 and found a man dead in his apartment, or when I was 12 and saw a guy on a dirt bike run into a barbed wire fence, or when I was 14 and saw a car jump the curb and hit a passerby. I've lived a lot of places, and seen and experienced a lot of things that others might find shocking, but which I personally don't find shocking in the sense of offensive or disgusting, simply because I'm so aware of the spectrum of human experience. While standing at the end of a long line in a convenience store in the late 90s, a black man came in and began looking through a discounted bin of cigarettes that was located just a few feet from the double glass door entry. This was years ago, before tobacco products were moved behind the cashier and out of reach. It was lunchtime, which accounted for the line of customers, on a bright and sunny spring day. From where I was standing and waiting, I saw an old yellow Ford pull up but not park. The black driver exited the car and came running into the store. The fellow bent over the bin didn't look up as the driver entered, nor did he notice the man approach his back. Without any warning, the driver pulled out a large butcher knife and stabbed the cigarette seeker repeatedly in the upper back and neck, and then ran back to his car and sped away. The stabbed man grabbed his throat, which was gushing blood, and ran screaming to the area in front of the drink coolers and collapsed. While this unfolded, at least 15 customers stood aghast, but did not react to assist the stabbed man. I alone yelled call 911 and get a towel. The cashier calmly continued ringing up the customers and sending them on their way, seemingly oblivious to what had just happened in full view. I ran and knelt beside the man, and tried to apply pressure to the wounds in his throat, but the blood continued to squirt out with each dying heartbeat. Someone finally handed me a towel, which I placed on the man's throat, but it was too late. His eyes dimmed and he died. I stood up and stepped across the pooling blood and walked out to the gas pumps and used the water hose to rinse the blood from my legs and hands and arms. Later, it was discovered the man in the yellow car and the dead man knew each other and had been arguing earlier. This happened in a safe area, in broad daylight, and in front of multiple witnesses. The last thing I expected to see that day was someone murdered. The last thing the man seeking a pack of cigarettes expected was to be killed while doing so. I don't know if it's the most shocking, but it's the first thing that came to my mind. When I was about 11 years old, I was eating dinner at my cousin's house. There were 5 kids, including me, then the mother and the stepfather. The parents were both abusive towards the 3 oldest kids, and I was always quiet around them because they had no problem telling other kids how they felt. Anyhow, they were serving Buff a 8-pack of boiled hot dogs. Remember, there were 7 of us, so 1 hot dog was left over. My cousin, the second oldest, who always seemed to get the worst punishment, decided to take the last hot dog for himself, and as he was reaching for it, his stepfather stabbed him in the hand with his fork and he wouldn't let him take the fork out of his hand. He had to sit there and watch all of us consume our repulsive meal while trying not to get blood on anything. At the time I remember thinking to myself, why would he do this? He knows he will get punished. As a child you rationalized things by making the victim the offender. I guess it was a way of coping. I see it now for what it was. He was the outcast and was treated as such by his evil mother and her slew of vile boyfriends and husbands. I've always admired superheroes since I can remember. I'm always willing to help someone, at least try when I can. I even considered studying medicine to be prepared for any problem I could face helping others. One day on a rainy day, I saw, on the side of the road, an accident. It just had happened and there was this man with his jaw broken walking back and forth. A few older women with a few scratches were crying and shouting for help. But what shocked me the most were the injured children. Some of them were in really bad shape. Fortunately, I thought, I had my aunt right beside me. She's a doctor. I know a few things. We can help. We couldn't do nothing. Nothing. The children were so injured that first aid would do more damage than good. We didn't have the right equipment. Most children didn't show visible injuries, but didn't respond either. They needed a hospital, but we were in middle of nowhere. Ambulance didn't respond, so this other guy offered to take the youngest yet most injured child in his car to the hospital. But I know, my aunt knows, This kid, the kid that was convulsing, drowning in his own blood, wouldn't make it. I'd never felt so useless in my life. I stumbled upon a dorm room a few doors from my own, where several male students were leaving the room after gang raping a young woman, who sat weeping on the floor, searching for her bloody underwear. I retrieved her underwear for her and tried to help her up, when her girlfriend arrived, who had been searching for her, and walked with her out the door. They refused my further help and my suggestion that we contact the police or dormitory authorities. A short time later, the girl's brother arrived, wearing thick leather gloves, pounding one fist into his hand, as he asked me where the guys were that attacked his sister. I showed him the room, which was now empty, the boys having fled. I almost got beat up just being in the vicinity of a crime, but the brother let me go when he understood I had tried to help. I can't think of anything worse than a man violating the private, tender sanctity of a woman. I am a selfish man myself, but I would not ever force myself on a woman. I have some empathy and compassion, although I am selfish in many, many other ways. Thank you, Am, for the request to answer. One night, when I was 12 years old, I was reading a holy book, a very calm feeling gotten into me and I felt sleepy after finish reading it. I put the book on the table and went to bed with my little sister. After a few minutes lying on the bed, I saw a light, a very strange light. It came out from the book that I had just read. The color was glow in the dark green color as if it was a reflection of the color of the book. But guess, what is the shape? It was a pyramid shape, Egyptian pyramid shape. A very beautiful shape. I was mesmerized by it, but yet too shocked I remained silent without waking my sister up, so I just stared at it until I slept. We woke up the next day and guess what? Both of us saw it, and because we were too afraid we remained silent. I never stopped wondering until today, what was it? How it could be? What happened if I touched it? Will I go to a different universe? Why it was a pyramid? Will it bring me to the past, ancient Egypt? Ridiculous. But it remained mystery until today. It can't be solved with human brain after all. But somehow I can sense it. It was the soul of the book. The words are alive because it is a holy book. It's a word from God. I never happened to see it again. Shocking but astonishing moment I ever encountered in my life. My father's suicide. In a few months, I was going to start kindergarten, but because I wasn't in school yet, but Mom usually let me stay up later and watch TV with her. She was always waiting for my dad to stumble home from somewhere. When he finally came home, he was drunk or high. Maybe both. Nothing new. I remember how normal the words sounded as he told my mom for what had to be the millionth time that he was going to end it all. End what? I didn't know. But I knew this was my cue to leave the room. I sat by my parents' bed and stared at my hands. Even now, I can remember how small they looked. My dad weaved his way to the front yard with his handgun in tow. I peeked through the curtain and saw him raise the gun to his head, hesitate for the briefest moment, pull the trigger, and fall to the ground. The rest of the night is a blur. My mother screams. Ambulances. People. So many people. Crying. Hushed voices. I just stared at my hands. Many years ago when I was living in South Africa at the time of apartheid, I was driving along a road in the outskirts of Johannesburg when I saw a white man in a car, on purpose, run straight into a little black boy of about 7 years old. He just sped off into the distance. I got out of my car and ran to the boy to see if he was alive, and he was, but so very badly injured. I tried to flag down the car to get help, but no one would stop. Car windows would open and people shout insults at me because a white woman wasn't meant to be touching a black person. The little boy died in my arms as a car full of white men drove past and spat on me.